Okie dokie. So we are live. We're live. We're going live on Facebook as well as Instagram. Thank you, everybody, for jumping on. Let's go ahead and start with our Astro consults. Hey, Cam, how's it going? Great to see you. So when we look at what we are doing today we're going live and we're going to be doing another 8 charts. I've been doing this for the past 5 days or so, as everybody's been really, really supportive of jumping on with the Astro content. So we are going to be taking 8 charts that you all have given me, your birth date, your birthplace, your exact birth time, and we're just going to be doing mini snippets of chart interpretation. I've run the charts, I haven't looked at them, so these are all on the fly, just giving you my 2 cents on what the stars kind of have in store for your life journey and what you can potentially work with from that perspective. If you would like more information, you can always schedule a private consult via scorpiorisingastrology.com or shoot me an email to sam@scorpiorisingastrology. And I also have classes. I have online classes. I have lots of ways you can support me. If I'm doing your chart and you found value in it, feel free to send a PayPal tip to sam@scorpiorisingastrology. But that's enough promotion. I would prefer to just Astro-Babble at your face. Let's go ahead and do that. Oh, and if you would like to be on the if you would like to have your chart read, give me your details, your birth date, your birth time, exact birth time, and your birthplace, spelling out the month and the day for those of you overseas so that I don't get the month and the day mixed up. And yeah, so first chart of the day is going to be Paula. Paula was born at 9:45 p.m. in Manchester. Love my UK people. Let's go ahead and take a look at what Paula's chart has to say. So first and foremost, we've got a Leo ascendant with the sun and Sag in the 5th. Super creative energy there. We've got a lot of identification with being a parent, because the 5th house is not just about creativity, it's also about sexuality and children. So identifying specifically with that role of being that caretaker, that parent archetype, and understanding how your creative force works in the world, not just in the projects that you might pursue, but also the people who you literally bring into the world. Ooh, mouth is already dry. Okay, so we've got that lovely fire energy happening in the personality. I think that's great. So Paula, you're just on fire right away. We do have the counterbalance to that fire being the moon in Capricorn in the 6th. So when we find the 6th house of health, wellness, and pets, as well as work, having that really strong earth energy of Capricorn and the moon being there, it indicates somebody who's very hardworking, somebody who has a good emotional diligence to them, somebody who's willing to take projects all the way, not just kind of leave them behind, but also somebody who's really determined to be a health advocate, not just for themselves, but others as well. Hey, everybody jumping on. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. I'm getting I'm getting my messages already. Everything's pinging and dinging and all that jazz. However, that moon in Capricorn in the 6th is being ruled by Saturn in Aries in the 9th. And Saturn in Aries in the 9th is also retrograde, which is not necessarily great. When we look at Saturn in Aries, that breaks up some of that restrictive fire, that restrictive earth energy, but it's in that 9th house of travel, higher education, and foreigners. So there might actually be some hesitation. There might actually be some issues with higher education in terms of college education. Either things were started and then they were stopped or had to be reapproached back later. Saturn is one of those planets that, again, matures during the first Saturn return. So when you're 28, 29, 30, depending on where Saturn is in your chart and whether or not it kind of retrograded in between, we've got a lot of hesitation in that 9th house because Saturn doesn't really mature until 30. So again, the idea that Saturn placement is in your 9th house of travel, but also foreigners and higher education, the idea that you started on that journey, you started on that higher education journey, or maybe start to book travel, but then things get delayed, things get backpedaled, and you have to reapproach it at a later date. So that's an interesting dynamic of Paula's charts. Everybody who's joining in, we're just doing live chart readings. I've got 8 charts here that we've been doing for the past couple days, and now I'm going live on Instagram as well at Scorpio Rising Astrology. So everybody's hitting me from so many different places. I love it. Let's go ahead and continue to look at Paula's chart. What else do we see in her chart? We've got Jupiter in Virgo in the second. Absolutely lovely. Love to see Jupiter in a financial house. That's always super fun, especially when we know Jupiter as the planet of luck and abundance and prosperity. We love to see that connection to the finances in somebody's chart. It is in Virgo. The second house being in Virgo specifically speaks towards being meticulous with finances. So although Jupiter tends to blow things up and really makes abundant wealth a possibility, we do have that kind of constraining, confining energy of Virgo, which likes to put things in boxes and make sure that everything is allocated appropriately. A good financial placement. I always like to see Virgo involved with finances. That second house is being ruled by Mercury and Scorpio in the fourth. So there might be some hidden family resources in terms of money because Neptune and Scorpio is also in the fourth. There's some really interesting dynamics that I'm starting to pick up on because we also have Pluto and Uranus in Virgo in the second. So we've got those outer planet transits, which tend to be very mysterious, tend to be very transformative, tend to be very uprooting in very personal places, connecting family with finance in Paula's chart. So it wouldn't surprise me if, because we have Scorpio in the fourth house and Neptune is there, that addiction issues got involved in finances relatively early, which fueled some of the financial education that Paula had to do on her own, understanding the idea that there is a very easy way to waste money, and that's by indulging in things or letting different toxic substances, people, places, things, especially in the family dynamic, take hold and drain financial resources. Because we've got Uranus in the house of finances, we do have a slight edge of unpredictability. Pluto is here too. Pluto is that level 50 planet, tends to mature when we're about halfway through the life. So I think finances overall is something that Paula will need to reconcile, especially when it comes to the family dynamic, because that seems to be where some of that underbelly of toxicity really has settled in her chart. Oh, that's interesting. That's fun. Didn't see that the first time around. So back to that Saturn in Aries retrograde in the ninth. It's actually in a mutual reception with Mars in Aquarius in the seventh. They're in a loose sextile as well. Mars is at 2 degrees, Saturn is at 5 degrees. That's great chemistry between the house of relationships and the house of foreigners and travel. So when we see that, there's definitely going to be a connection to the spouses that Paula chooses, either being educators themselves or being foreigners, long distance relationships, her actually moving or like while she's on a trip falling in love, or the idea that her spouse is from another country and immigrated over to where she is now. Just that connection between her seventh house of relationships and her ninth house of travel, foreigners, higher education. That's that mutual reception between Saturn and Mars. Cool. That's a lot of good stuff, I think. So thank you, Paula, for submitting your chart. I appreciate you very much. Everybody's jumping on the comments this morning. Good morning. Brian, Jennifer, Randy, Aries gaining control in the end. Love you. Jana, Amanda, Carrie, Fatima, Rosemary, April, thank you so much, everybody. Yes, I will definitely add you all to the queue. Just private message me, again, your exact birth date, place, time. I need that time specifically to be super accurate. And we will move on to the next chart because we're about 8 minutes in, so making good time. Okay, let's go ahead and pull up Randy's chart. Randy was born at 6:52 a.m. in Council Bluffs. So let's take a peek at Randy's chart. Thank you, Brother Lightheart. I appreciate you on Instagram. I appreciate you following me. Just message me your birth date, place, and time for that, and I'll add you to the queue. The queue's pretty long, but if you'd like to book a private consult in the meantime, you totally can. Okay. So Randy's got really interesting stuff on his ascendant. He's got the South Node, Mercury in Pisces, and the Sun in Pisces on his ascendant. When we look at any stellium on the ascendant, there's this idea of being supercharged in that particular sign. So Pisces has taken over Randy's life. We could apply all of Pisces signifiers in terms of spirituality, martyr complex, very artistic, but also very wishy-washy in terms of boundaries, emotionally intuitive and empathetic, connected to mediumship abilities, connected to, let's see, what are some other Pisces things? I think those are really the core ones that I see as true Piscean traits. That Mercury is in a it's in Cazimi. It's in within 1 degree of the sun. So Mercury is in the heart of the sun. The idea that Randy is an excellent communicator. His words hold large amounts of power. The South Node is here, though. So when it comes to life mission, although Randy came in with all of this Pisces energy, he's already mastered it. He already understands that. He doesn't need more of that. Instead, he needs his North Node in Virgo to be activated, which is in the 7th house of relationships. So his entire life mission this time around is about creating an ideal partnership with people, persons, places, things, where he can actually find true intimacy that makes him feel especially mentally secured, because that Mercury in Pisces is ruling his Virgo 7th house. So the idea that peace of mind in a spouse is something that Randy should look for right off the bat. All of that first house Pisces stuff is being ruled by Jupiter in Capricorn in the 11th, as well as Saturn in Capricorn in the 11th. Goodness, all of these recent transits in Capricorn have just been smashing your friendship house. That's crazy. So for those of you who don't know, we've had a lot of issues in Capricorn lately. We've had Pluto, we've had Jupiter, we've had Saturn, we've had Mars, we've had the moon, we've had Mercury at a certain point, but most recently we've had the Jupiter-Pluto conjunction. Saturn has escaped in order to Aquarius, but all of those will be retrograding back into Capricorn later this year, only to be free from that spell around the equinox, not equinox, the solstice, December 21st. All of that Capricorn energy, all of that mischief is happening in your house of friendships and social groups, Randy. So that's been really, really difficult for you specifically, especially because you identify so heavy with your social groups and your tribe, because Jupiter is ruling your ascendant and Jupiter is in the 11th house of friendships. So if there was one way, if you're feeling out of sorts and you're not really sure how to bring yourself back from the brink, it's really about reaching out to friends. It's really about connecting with those people socially, joining groups, finding your tribe, and really making sure that you feel at home in the people that you surround yourself with. Times like this where we're social distancing are literally the bane of your existence. But post all of this craziness, the idea that coming back into those friendship circles is going to be the medicine that really needs to take place. Okay, we've got the moon in Leo, which is in the 6th house of work, health, and pets, almost conjoining Uranus, which is really interesting from a medical astrology perspective, because we've got Uranus and the moon conjoining in Leo in the 6th. We want to be very, very careful of the medical sign influence of Leo. So Leo rules the spine as well as the eyes and the heart. And because Uranus tends to bring unpredictability, electrical overstimulation, and from a global perspective, Uranus transits bring about natural disasters. Think about that being in the body. So there's this uprooting energy in the eyes, the heart, the spine that we just need to be a little bit careful of with Randy medically. Because the moon in Leo is being ruled by the sun in the 1st, and the 6th is the house of work, we find that Randy tends to be a little bit of a workaholic, or over-identifying with the topics of the 6th house, like work, health, pets. Because Pisces is involved, we could also see that a lot of physical problems are also internal in terms of emotional. The idea that feelings and all of that psychic energy that Pisces receives so well does manifest in the body a little bit quicker with Randy because of that Pisces tendency. Yes, we've got a couple other hidden aspects of the chart, which I think are interesting, but a little bit too personal to get into on this broadcast. When we look at Mercury also ruling the 4th house of family, Mercury is ruling the 7th house of relationships as well. One of the big things, again, all of your relationship houses are really lit up in a fantastic way. So I think if you work over the course of your life on steering towards building bridges, steering towards making sure that the people around you feel safe and you feel safe with the people around you as well, that you're more of a connector, that you bring people together, and that you understand that that's really the life purpose that you've chosen, as opposed to kind of retreating into the self and woe is me, kind of that Pisces Leo energy that tends to get a little bit afflicting. We just need to calm that down and really expand you out into the tribe and social groups which you've chosen to focus on here. Cool. Thank you, everybody looking at the comments now. Yes, go ahead and send me your birth date, place, time if you'd like to be added to the forecast, not the forecast, the queue for all of these live consults. I appreciate everybody sending love my way. Thank you, thank you. Let's go ahead and keep the ball rolling with Sarah. So Sarah was born 9:17 p.m. in Evanston. Let's take a look at what Sarah's chart. Whoa, Sarah, hit me with a Virgo stellium. Holy crap! So we've got Venus, we've got the moon, we've got the sun. Oh, she's a new moon baby, just like me. So we've got Venus, the moon, the sun, Pluto, Mercury, Uranus, all in Virgo, all in the 5th house. Wow! And Venus is here, so Venus is ruling the ascendant in Taurus. Crazy town. So let's talk about this. The 5th house seems to be a little bit of a theme. First thing this morning in the first 3 charts. Again, the 5th house is the house of creativity, children, and sexuality. A lot of people, when I say sexuality, one of the things that I'd like everybody to understand about that is, I know sexuality isn't necessarily a term that's PC. In today's day and age, it's a lot easier to talk about. But I think when we look at a Virgo stellium in the 5th, the idea of not being prudish and to understand that there is a healthy way to express sexuality is an important part of Sarah's chart because it's such an important part of life. Likewise, children, over-identifying with being a parent, bringing life into the world, and creativity. All of this can be kind of summarized metaphysically in that creative space. So whether it's the physical act of procreation, yeah, or it's the metaphysical act of manifesting, or whether it's the kind of artistic expression of bringing in a piece into the world, which is kind of like your baby. Especially, me as a writer, as something that I do, I think that creative endeavors are like a form of gestation and bringing something into the world. And because you've got so much hitting your 5th house, I think that we really need to understand that that's how you identify as a creator, as somebody who makes, as somebody who brings things into the world through love, through passion, through really getting a lot of those creative fires going. The issue with this house being in Virgo is Virgo tends to be super picky. So one of the ways that you might find blockage in this process is if you specifically start to get too hung up on the details, too hung up on your medium, too hung up about the space being clean, the space being tidy, too hyper-focused on the right timing or being in the right headspace. Creativity is messy, and Virgo doesn't really do mess well. So when we look at Sarah's 5th house of creativity, it's about understanding that Virgo tendency wants to make sure that everything is feng shui, that the candles are lit, that the incense is going, that the stars are aligned for this creative process, and creativity doesn't necessarily run on a schedule. Yeah, so although that Virgo stellium is super powerful, it is still a Virgo stellium in the 5th house of creativity. So being a creative Virgo is something that we need to emphasize in Sarah's chart, and making sure that the creativity doesn't become self-sabotaged by all of that kind of anal retentive Virgo energy. Virgo is also one of the most productive signs of the zodiac, though. So if you do conquer that ability to kind of put the pickiness aside, I think you'll realize that all of that juice, all of that 5th house juice is really there for the taking. Let's see. We do have Mars and Scorpio in the 7th, 5 degrees away from Neptune in Scorpio in the 7th. Relationships are hot. Relationships are heavy. Relationships being ruled by Mars and Scorpio, things tend to be secretive, things tend to be hidden. Again, sexuality themes are brought to the surface because Scorpio physically does rule the reproductive space, but energetically does rule that act of procreation. Because that's something that's private, that's hidden, that involves a lot of moisture, that water sign, but also that fire, that heat, that Mars ruled energy. We just need to be careful that relationships don't get a little bit too fiery, a little bit too wet and sloppy, because Neptune is here, which compromises boundaries naturally, and that can be a little bit of an issue. What is up with Saturn in Aries retrograde? So this is the second chart that we've had with Saturn in Aries retrograde in the 12th, being ruled by that Mars and Scorpio in the 7th. So the idea that if those relationships do get out of hand, there is a hidden enemy component. There is even a hospitalization component that's connected to the 7th house. So being very specific of who you allow into your intimate spaces, being very specific about safe words, about understanding what it means to be in a relationship that is both intense and scorpionic and Mars oriented, but also has the potential to cause great harm if you're not careful. Again, that Neptune swings into the relationship space, starts to make things confused and muddy, which then leads to that Saturn in Aries retrograde in the 12th of hidden enemies and hospitalizations. So we need to be careful about that dynamic. But again, you always have your creative outlet in the 5th house. There's so much happening in that 5th house. It's ridiculous. So if relationships get a little bit too heavy, you can always track back and start to chill in that home that you've made for yourself in the 5th. Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Everybody's jumping online, watching, and commenting. If you would like to be a part of this fun little experiment, you can always send your birth date, place, and exact birth time to me via Messenger, and we can add you to the queue. Also, if you have questions about classes, if you have questions about private consults, just send me an email to sam@scorpiorisingastrology.com, and I will send you those links. Let's pull up our 4th chart. We're about halfway through. Tara, we'll go with Tara. Tara was born at 8 p.m. in Billiarkay? I can't pronounce that, Tara, but you know who you are. Tara at 8 p.m. She's on the docket. Let's go ahead and look at her ascendant in Gemini, which is being ruled by Mercury in Libra retrograde in the 5th. So back to that 5th house. She's also got her sun in Libra in the 5th. So again, that creative tendency. Because Mercury is retrograde, it's a little bit, and this is an interesting thing to talk about when we look at planetary placements, but their conditions have changed. So in the previous chart, we looked at a stellium in the 5th house. Which really, really activates all of those 5th house tendencies of creativity, sexuality, and children. However, when we look at this chart now, we have a little bit of a pileup. It's not as strong. Mercury is here, ruling the ascendant, but Mercury is in Libra, whereas Mercury was in Virgo in the previous chart. And Mercury is also retrograde in this chart, which is not necessarily ideal. So we have a different flavor of creativity in this chart versus the previous chart where everything was so jam-packed. Things are a little bit more spread out here. Interestingly enough, we still have Saturn in Aries retrograde, this time up in the 11th. So we'll talk about that. But the idea that there is creative potential, but the creative potential is a little bit compromised because Mercury is retrograde in the 5th. The sun is also in Libra, which is the sign of its fall, or detriment rather. Detriment, because it's the opposite sign of its exaltation. So the sun is in its least powerful point, really. Okay. Let's see, what else? That entire 5th house of Libra is being ruled by Venus in Scorpio, co-present with Neptune in Scorpio in the 6th. That's a little bit tricky, not gonna lie. So we've got the sun being ruled by, the sun is in its detriment and Venus is also in its fall. So Venus is opposing its natural sign of Taurus, making Venus weak as well. So we've got a double dose of weakness when it comes to some core personality traits for Tara. We've got the idea, she's got the idea that she's rather unworthy, that there's a lack of self-worth, a lack of self-value in Tara's chart that I think needs to be rectified right away. One of the ways that she might be able to rectify that is actually by throwing herself into her work dynamic. But the issue with her work dynamic is that it does have that Scorpio energy to it, which means that she's very qualified and very capable of working in situations that are dark, dank, and potentially toxic. She is able to navigate those waters in her work environment. Mars in Virgo in the 4th is ruling that Venus in Scorpio in the 6th. So one of the things that she might actually do very well with in terms of work is working with homes, working in real estate, working with parents, working with specifically parents or houses that are in need of a lot of rehab, that are in need of a lot of tough love. And that 4th house theme of family specifically being the ruler of that 6th house deep Scorpio energy where Venus is afflicted, co-present with Neptune. There's a lot of needing to clean up after everything that has occurred in that family work space. Because we have Mars in Virgo ruling Saturn in Aries retrograde in the 11th, as well as the North Node here, one of the core principles of Tara's life is to actually unlock the power of friendship, which sounds like a Care Bear episode, but it's so true. Because that South Node is in the 5th house in Libra, where all of her creative energy is, but her North Node, where she's going in this lifetime, is very much connected to the idea of taking that 4th house of family, taking all of those deep, rugged, hard lessons that she has to learn about family and applying them to her friendships, which will take a lot of time because Saturn's here retrograde in Aries. Wouldn't surprise me as well if friendships were a little bit difficult for the first 30 years of life because of that self-confidence issue, I think. But as the chart matures, there is great potential for Tara's chart to ripen. As time moves on, we really see that a lot of these retrograde planets will start to become not necessarily stumbling blocks, but building blocks in Tara's chart. She'll be able to unlock her creativity, work with some of that, work within some of that work toxicity, bring about some of those friendships into her family dynamic, and really repair some of those relationships which were restrictive and hard and tough in the beginning. I think that that's something that her chart actually shows great promise for, especially if she continues the theme of working with family dynamics that are a little bit toxic. She does have her moon in Taurus, which is in the sign of its exaltation, ruling her 2nd house of finance, and her moon is in the 12th. So the moon being in the 12th, again, an idea that she's emotionally reclusive, but one of the things that moon in Taurus paired with that Venus Scorpio energy in the 6th, that's somebody who's uniquely qualified to work with trauma. That's somebody who's uniquely qualified to work in the hospital field, to see things that no human should ever see, and to really work with bringing people back to their families. And if she's able to master that energy over time and maybe as a second career go into that triage space where she's able to dig into those really uncomfortable places that a lot of people fear to tread, and she's able to take all these placements that have really fermented over time, bring about her creative resources when it comes to parenting people who are really in that childlike state of transition after being hit with major illness, and bring forward all of those positive traits to help people return home to their families. That's really the big life mission of Tara, is to make sure that all of that happens with a tiny dose and speckling of friendship. Cool. all of that. Hey, Tony, thanks everybody for joining. I appreciate you. Thank you for all the messages. This is absolutely lovely. We're about halfway through, and we're about halfway through, so we're making good time. Let's go ahead and move to Samantha's chart. Samantha was born at 12:25 a.m. in Harlow. So let's go ahead and look at her chart. There is a lot of zigging and a lot of zagging here. We do have a grand trine. We do have Mars directly opposing the ascendant. That's rough. We do have Mercury retrograde in Aries. No Saturn retrograde in Aries, though. So that's an improvement. Yeah, we've just got a lot of stuff in this chart that we need to cover. So the ascendant is in Scorpio, making the ruler of the chart Mars. Mars is in Taurus in the 7th, opposing the ascendant directly, almost exactly by degree. At 27 degrees 54 clicks in, the ascendant is at 28 4 clicks in. So that's just a couple minutes away from an exact opposition. So that's pretty rough. Relationships are tough. When it comes to Mars, this is also a night chart. So Mars is not terrible, but not great for sure in the relationship space. There's going to be a lot of fire and ice in the relationships for Samantha. I think that Mars is tempered by a lot of her placements, but it's not enough to stop her from over identifying with relationships, them potentially turning toxic, and her resenting them for not seeing that all she's trying to do is help. It's tricky. She does have Venus and Taurus in the 7th, which is good. It's a mitigator to that Mars because Venus and Mars are opposite energies. But again, she's brought that opposing energy into her relationships. One of the things that when Mars and Venus get together, it's about understanding in that house that there's going to be extremes. Yeah, you're going to go from hot to cold in your relationship house, Samantha. So the idea that 1 minute everything will be piping hot, the next minute it will be freezing cold. And striking all the irons hot and resting while everything is freezing, definitely something that you'll need to master when it comes to relationships. Because Mars and Venus are co-present in the 7th house of relationships, bisexuality, having two partners, or working with polyamory is something that I see a lot in people's charts. Understanding that gender norms are eroding very quickly, so you don't need to necessarily hold the passive role or the active role in a relationship. And understanding that we all have Mars and Venus co-present within us at any given time, but you've specifically brought those two planets into your relationship dynamic. Mastering the difference and the similarities and the push and pull of those masculine feminine principles are something that you'll need to work on in that relationship dynamic. Mars and Taurus is ruling the sun in Aries in the 6th. When we find the sun in its exaltation being ruled by Mars in a relationship house, I've seen this placement multiple times before. It's somebody who, on the negative side of the expression, tends to overbear on their partner's health and really tends to play nurse when playing nurse is not necessarily effective to the relationship dynamic. However, on the positive end, it's somebody who forms a lot of really strong relationships in their work dynamic. They might actually meet their spouse at work or work in the same field as their spouse. This is somebody who also, because 6th house is related to pets as well as work and health, they might actually work in the veterinary field or be a vet tech or be married to somebody who works with big, fuzzy animals. Lovely. Mars and Aries in the 6th is also somebody who over-identifies with work, somebody who what they do is who they are. That's a big thing that we see with that sun in the 6th. The moon is at 26 in Cancer, which is in its own house, which is great. So the emotions are relatively strong. And making a trine to the ascendant, a separating trine, but a trine nonetheless to the ascendant in Scorpio. So emotions, Samantha tends to be rather emotional just in general, and over-identifying with those emotions is both a positive trait and a negative trait, but that watery energy, that intuitive kind of mama bear energy that Cancer brings forward is doubled down in her personality, but she does have that spark of the sun in Aries that she needs to watch out for. some heat behind all that fluid. Because the moon is in Cancer in the ninth, the idea of travel being very close to Samantha's heart, emotionally relating to foreigners, finding, like, whenever I see the moon in Cancer in the ninth, it's always somebody who craves to start an Airbnb and take care of people from out of town. I know because I have that placement, but it's just that idea that all the heart wants is to make somebody feel safe when they feel like they're in a foreign environment, and that's a really big message from the heart space. So when in doubt, one of the ways that you can reclaim your emotional sanity, Samantha, is actually by nurturing and caretaking for others, which I know is a little bit difficult in this time and can lead to some tricky relationship dynamics. But even if you're reaching out to people via social media, even if you're trying to extend yourself emotionally and take care of people and check in with people, any little bit that you do in that department will really help soothe the heart. Let's see. What else do we have? We have Neptune and Sagittarius retrograde in the second, not a great financial placement. And Jupiter in Capricorn in the third, ruling that Neptune. Jupiter in Capricorn is in the sign of its detriment because it is exalted in Cancer, meaning the opposite sign Capricorn is its detriment. Jupiter in Capricorn is in the sign of communication. It's in the sign of teaching. Not the sign, the house of teaching, the house of communication, the house of writing, because that is connected to the second house of finance, and where is Pisces? And the fifth house of creativity. One of the things that Samantha will actually rejoice in and potentially gain financially from is writing, teaching, speaking. That's something that is in her chart strongly, although we do need to be a little bit careful because Jupiter is not in his ideal spot in the chart, doesn't necessarily like to be in Capricorn. Saturn is ruling that Jupiter in Capricorn. Saturn is in Gemini in the 8th house of death, taxes, and estates. When that's connected to the 3rd house, it's teaching people how to be good in business. I think that's really where Samantha might shine, is taking all of that drive that she has for her own work and teaching people how to do that for themselves. That entrepreneurial streak, especially that involves the Cancer moon, kind of giving, instead of giving a man a fish, you're teaching them to fish, that kind of thing. I think that's more Samantha's style, as opposed to just teaching them random stuff that they're not going to use. But we do want to be careful about that financial house, because Neptune is there. Finances tend to be muddy. Finances tend to be confusing. Finances tend to slip between your fingers. It's not an ideal placement. So we need to have somebody coming in to work on your finances, specifically a CPA, an accountant, somebody who knows how to handle money, who can, in some cases, because Neptune is confusing and does tend to bring mystery around finances, take money away from you, put it in accounts where you cannot touch, in order to save you from that Neptune in your financial house where money just seems to disappear. So yeah, that's a little bit about Samantha's chart. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Let's go ahead and keep moving on. We've got everybody sending me messages. If you would like to be part of this, you can always send me your birth date, place, and exact birth time, and we will add you to the queue. If you are enjoying this, feel free to sign up for a private consult, take a class, PayPal me some extra cash, because this is what I do for a living. Sam at ScorpioRisingAstrology.com. And let's keep moving on with the charts. We've got 3 more to go. We're on to Miranda. Miranda, who was born at 6 p.m. in Oklahoma City. Let's see. Y'all, I can't with this business. Ever since the beginning of this live stream, I cannot tell you how many charts have this exact placement, where the ascendant is being opposed by the ruler, or the ascendant is being opposed by multiple planets. And I kind of broke down and talked about this a little bit yesterday. And Miranda, we're going to talk about this with you, but we've already talked about it in a couple charts so far. You have your ascendant in Leo at 18 degrees. You also have your sun at 38 degrees, which is ruling your ascendant, directly opposing it in the 7th house of relationships. What this means for the millionth time is, for those of you who are watching, who obviously need to hear this message again, and I recognize that as the vessel, I need to hear this message again. So we're all going through this together. Over-identification with your relationships is toxic. And this is something that we see when the ruler of the ascendant is in the 7th house of relationships, especially because it is the sun, the planet of ego and identification. With these live chart readings, we're really just trying to help you understand these themes. And when we keep seeing this theme in all of these charts, this is the message, is your sense of self is directly connected to who you bring into your life as a spouse. And that Disney white picket fence, happily ever after, is not necessarily what makes people happy. And it's not necessarily going to work out that way. And that's okay. Just because a relationship fails does not mean that you have failed as a person. Just because you have a partner who treats you poorly does not mean that you need to stay with them because they are who you are. That over merging of self with relationships is what a ruler of the ascendant in the 7th really speaks to, especially when they're in opposition, which means that there's a sense of needing to learn how to separate, how to pull apart you from your partner, and how to make sure that that relationship doesn't turn into a squabble, an opposition, a war, because who you are is very different from who your partner is, and giving up your sense of self for somebody else is just a recipe for emotional disaster. So thank you for everybody who joined me. That was my TED Talk. Let's go ahead and continue reading Miranda's chart, shall we? Back to a 5th house stellium. We've got, this is our second 5th house stellium, well, almost third 5th house stellium. We've got Jupiter, we've got Uranus, we've got the moon, and we've got Neptune, all in the 5th house in Sagittarius in Miranda's chart, making a loose sign-based trine to her ascendant. Because we've got Jupiter in Sag, the sign that it rules in that 5th house of creativity, massive firepower for Miranda's creativity. Massive, absolutely massive. Jupiter makes things expansive. Jupiter makes things regal. Jupiter makes things abundant. And because that Jupiter is in its right place, making a loose sign-based trine to the ascendant, we've got some serious firepower when it comes to creativity, children, and sexuality. There's a lot of good synergy there. We do have Uranus, we do have the moon, we do have Neptune. Neptune and Uranus tend to be disruptive in this space as well. So creativity tends to take you away, tends to carry you away and make you feel uprooted. It makes you feel like you're lost in the swell of all of this creative, sexual, kind of childish energy that the 5th house brings forward. And the moon is here too. The moon in Sagittarius being ruled by Jupiter means strong emotions, especially potential anger issues or authority issues, because when Jupiter touches the moon, it makes emotions big. But when both Jupiter and the moon are in a fire sign, that means anger, joy, excitement, but overly angry, overly joyous, overly excited could potentially be an issue emotionally for Miranda. So we just need to be a little bit careful with that emotional placement. Sun in Aquarius in the 18th, we've kind of in the 18th. Goodness, at 18 degrees in the 7th. We've already kind of talked about that. She's got Mercury in Capricorn in the 6th house of work, health, and pets. It's an interesting placement. Let's look at Saturn for that. So again, we have the 6th house of work being ruled by the 4th house of family. One of the things that she might actually do for a living is work with families, specifically families who have gone under hard times because Saturn is involved here. She might work in financial aid. She might work in social services. She might work in some sort of government or law agency that caters to families who have undergone hardship is a good way to think about it, because that sixth house of work is tied to that fourth house of family, and we have Saturn energy there, which is restrictive and oppressive and drying and astringent. So there's a lot of, hey, everybody jumping on Instagram, thank you so much. Yes, so that's that. That's an interesting kind of work placement, just as an FYI. Let's look at money, because because Mercury in Capricorn does rule the second house of finance for Virgo. There is good earning potential at job. Not necessarily career, because career is something different. In astrology, the second house of finance is separated from the sixth house of work, which is also separated from the 10th house of career, or what somebody is known for. Yeah. So what Miranda does on a daily basis is going to be that family involvement, that Mercury in Capricorn ruled by Saturn and Scorpio in the fourth. Which is going to give her good money, because Mercury rules the second house of finance and is in the house of work. So that's a great synergy there. But what Miranda will be known for throughout her life is her 10th house in Taurus, which is ruled by Venus in Pisces and Mars in Pisces in the 8th. Very, very fascinating. Venus is in Pisces, the sign of her exaltation. She loves to be in Pisces. Great planetary placement, Miranda. Bravo on that. But the 8th house is tricky, because the 8th house is the house of death, taxes, and estates. Mars is also here in Pisces. He does not like to be in Pisces. He would prefer to be in a water or an air or a fire sign, not a water sign, especially not one that's as wishy-washy as Pisces. But Venus definitely trumps him because she's in her exaltation. When we look at Venus and Mars being co-present in the 8th, and they're ruling respectively the 4th house of family, where's Aries, the 9th house of travel. Venus is ruling that 10th house of career and the 3rd house of writing. I think that one of the things that she might actually be known for is not necessarily the family work that she does about bringing people through that hard time from a family perspective, but also helping them in their time of transition. Like it's one thing to do a job, Miranda, but it's another thing to have a calling and a vocation. And because all of these houses are kind of connecting through that Venus-Mars placement, I think you might actually, that would be interesting. That would be super interesting. Because again, we've talked about Mars and Venus coming together as being breaking through gender norms, and working with both sides of the gender spectrum. It'd be really interesting if you started to work very heavily with the trans community, if you started working very heavily with the LGBTQ community, and you started doing work with those who are impoverished or kicked out of their family home because of their sexual orientation, because of their gender fluidity, because of their personal identification with neither Venus nor Mars, but a combination of both. I think that would be a really interesting way for you to kind of express all of that, especially because you've got your North Node in Cancer in the 12th, ruled by your Mars and Sagittarius in the 5th of sexuality. That might be, again, a really fascinating way for you to kind of fulfill your life's purpose, is working with people who are impoverished and the family dynamic has been compromised, but specifically those who are in that sexual gray area, but who are transiting into a new life, and you're able to help them through maybe some of their hospitalizations, through maybe some of their dark trials of the soul, where you reach in with all of the resources at your disposal because of your work, and you're able to socially guide them and kind of bring them into a new family dynamic. Yeah, that'd be super fun. Thank you, everybody, for sending in your birth date, places, and times. I'm looking at all of those messages now. I appreciate you. Thank you, Brian. I love the backdrop, too. It's just a tapestry that I got on Amazon a while back. Thank you, Marie, everybody. I appreciate you. And yes, we've got two more charts to do, and we're looking at 10 minutes to do them, because I like to keep these at about an hour. So Jana, who was born at 1:05 a.m. in Finland. Let's go to Jana in Finland. Okay, so we've got the ascendant in Virgo. Ooh, Jupiter's here. That's fun. Oh, Saturn's here. That's not fun. Okay, so we've got a little bit of a bipolar energetic dynamic with Jana, not necessarily clinically bipolar, but let me explain what I mean by this. Just like Mars and Venus cancel each other out because they're opposite ends of that energetic spectrum, so too do Jupiter and Saturn cancel each other out. Jana has placed both Jupiter and Saturn in her first house of self. So when it comes to her personality, there's this really expansive side to who she is, and she has this really growth-oriented, productive side to her, which is all about moving forward and creating opportunity. She also has this really strict and restrictive side to her as embodied by Saturn, where she has this sense of not good enough, personality flaws that will only develop around the time that she's 30, like the first 30 years of life being extremely difficult to master the big side of her personality, but also the little side of her personality. And because the North Node is here as well, just that idea that she's got some super Virgo tendencies, but manifesting those in a healthy way is going to be the challenge. Let's look to Mercury, which rules Virgo in her chart, for more information. And she's got a Scorpio stellium. Absolutely fabulous. Whenever I see Virgo in the chart and a lot of Scorpio in the chart, Virgo and Scorpio tend to be two of the most neurotic signs. Yeah. And I can say that as somebody who has Scorpio rising with Pluto on the ascendant. Like, there's a lot of neuroses with Virgo and Scorpio being so dominant in the chart, and we need to respect that. So just understand that mental checks are going to be friendship wise, but also personally, you're going to need to do a lot of those to make sure that the voices in your head and the impulses that you have don't override your healthy voices and impulses as well. Sun in Scorpio, Uranus in Scorpio, Venus in Scorpio, Mercury in Scorpio, all in the third house of writing, teaching, and communication. She's a writer, she's a teacher, she's a communicator. It's a great lineup, but what she writes about and teaches about are going to be the darker sides of life, because Scorpio is involved, but also because Mars is in Leo in the 12th, bringing to light all of those hidden enemies, potentially addiction issues, those hospitalizations, those medical traumas, all the things that Scorpio loves to talk about that nobody else likes to talk about. She's here to write, to teach, and to communicate about those things. Also interesting, just when we dial down some of the significations of the third house also rules siblings and neighbors. So when I see the ruler of the third in the 12th of hidden enemies, not getting along with siblings is definitely going to be part of that dynamic, a toxic relationship potentially. But because the sun is in Scorpio and Mars is in Leo, there is mutual reception there. I think that over-identifying with that conflict might be possible when they were younger, but as that relationship matures, that opposition might actually turn into a beautiful blessing, to the point where that sibling, those cousins, those people that surrounded you in your neighborhood growing up might actually help you write some of your material, might help you teach some of your material. And that's a really interesting dynamic, I think, for sure. Especially because Mercury is in the third house of communication, ruling the first. Just that identification as somebody who truly speaks her mind, teaches, and allows her message to be heard. Very powerful stuff. Saturn is in the first house in Virgo, but it's also ruling the moon in Capricorn in the fifth of creativity. So we've got that creative spur. Jana's got the juice. She's got that ability to really make stuff happen, to bring things into the world. Although Saturn ruling the fifth house is not necessarily a great signifier for fertility, pregnancies might be a little bit difficult, especially if dietary protocols are not followed strictly and vitamin and mineral contents are not ingested prior to and post pregnancy. Capricorn is one of those signs that tends to be a little bit barren. So we just need to be, if children are part of the picture or want to be part of the picture, we're going to need to do multiple forms of self-care to catch up with that. Pluto's in the second house of finance, being ruled by the third, the Venus and Scorpio in the third. That's an interesting placement. Pluto, wherever Pluto is placed, we have that time delay. So around 50 years old is when Pluto really starts to come forward and that power starts to be expressed and known. So finance is going to be tricky for the first half of the life, but it's going to come to a massive fruition when, hey, Emily, hey, everybody jumping on. So it's going to come to a massive fruition 50 years into the life, especially when it comes to that writing, teaching, and communicating. There's going to be a healthy midlife crisis, actually, where all of that Venus and Scorpio energy, which was very difficult to manage in the first half of the life, starts to be activated by that Pluto in the second house of finance. And we start to really see some juicy material wealth coming through because of all of the writing, teaching, and communicating foundation work that was done in the first half of the life. So that's a little bit about John's chart. Thank you, Samantha. Thank you, Marie. Thank you, Raven. I appreciate everybody jumping on. If you would like to add your charts to the list, feel free to send me your birth date, place, and exact birth time, and we will add you to the queue. We've got a couple more days of queue lined up, so please be patient. And if you would like a personal consult, you can always send me an email, sam@scorpiorisingastrology.com, or if you like these videos, feel free to tip me. Again, PayPal, sam@scorpiorisingastrology.com. Boom, boom. Now we're on to Brian. Last chart. This is how we wrap it up. 2 a.m. in Greenfield. This is Brian's chart. Here we are with a Scorpio ascendant, 29 degrees, Sag stellium. Man, Moon and Saturn conjunct in Scorpio in the third. This is going to be fun. Okay, last chart was a doozy. Thanks, Brian. So we've got that ascendant at 29 degrees, 50 clicks in. We need to be very specific about that birth time, Brian. If you are guessing within 5 minutes, we really need to be super specific. 10, 15 minutes off before or after 2 a.m. and the chart would totally flip. So we need to be very specific about the birth time. If you're not sure about the birth time, please go back and make sure that you get it to the minute, because the ascendant is right on that edge, and just a couple minutes can change the entire layout of the chart. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at the stellium. Why not? We're interested. This is our second Sagittarius stellium of the day. So we've got Uranus, we've got the Sun, we've got the South Node, we've got Jupiter, we've got Mercury, and we've got Neptune, all in Sagittarius, all in the fourth house of family. Interesting. Bet you that family dynamic was something else, huh, Brian? We've also got Jupiter in Sag, which is a saving grace. Absolutely excellent. It is just outside of that Sun combustion. But what was trapped in the Sun combustion within 7.5 degrees of the Sun is the South Node. One of the things about family, Brian, that I think is really interesting is that you've already mastered it in a previous experience. But Instagram's about to fade. So catch the last minutes on Facebook for those of you who are following on Instagram. The South Node indicates where we have been, not necessarily where we're going. And you've placed that South Node in the house of family. So all of the things that happened in the past with family, past family experiences, you've got a lot of lessons there. You've got a lot of energy there. But one of the tasks of this life experience is to actually pull through all of those experiences and move into that 10th house of career success, which is ruled by Mercury in Sagittarius in the fourth. Because Mercury is still in the fourth, it would be really interesting to see if you went into the family business. It would be really interesting to see if in some way, shape, or form, you took that fourth house of family and incorporated it into your career somehow, some way. I think that would be a really smart way for you to do it. I think it would be an interesting way to work on the karma of that fourth house where you've put so much of your identity, and making sure that you don't stay there. You don't stay physically locked in your home, because the fourth house is that private space. It's the most private midnight part of the chart. So making sure that you take that sun and you actually allow it to shine for other people to see, and you don't get lost in doing so much of that internal work that you don't apply it to the actual life mission of being successful, which is really what the Mercury and Sag ruling the North Node in Gemini begs you to do. Because Mars in the eighth house is ruling, or Mars in the second house in Libra is ruling the eighth house of death, taxes, and estates. There is a connection between earning money from estates. There is connection between earning money from inheritance, from the death and dying process, but also learning to master finance in this life, I think will be very important. We've got Venus in Libra here, so money does tend to show up when money is needed. Venus in Libra is in her proper place. She is in her domicile astrologically. She loves to be in Libra, and having that in the second house does bring that kind of mucilage to that financial house. The financial wheels are greased in the right direction. But because Mars is here and because Mars is ruling the eighth, I think a large amount of Brian's money is going to come from those topics of death, those topics of accounting and taxes, as well as from potential business endeavors, because the eighth house does rule client work. I find a lot as well. Let's see. What else? What else do we see in Brian's chart? That Sun in Sagittarius is ruling the 12th house of hidden enemies and hospitalizations. When we find that the Sun is connected to the 12th house, there is that idea that you are your own worst enemy. We need to, again, take that. I think the theme that I keep seeing in the chart is we need to take that Sun that's in the fourth of family and personal stuff and really take all of the pressure from off you and your work. It's not necessarily about you all the time, Brian, nor what you've been through, nor other people. It's about taking those collective experiences and pushing them outside of yourself to where they can be of benefit to others, and making sure that you're not holding on to all of that baggage and thinking that it's your lot in life, it's your karma, it's your stuff. There is a lot of it, but how do we transmute that into an active role instead of keeping that Sun in the fourth house where it's hidden, ruling the 12th house where it's hidden? We need to take that solar energy, that Mercury and Sag, and start pushing that into the 10th house of sharing, of displaying, of being in business for yourself and giving those lessons out to other people. Because Mars in the second house of finance is ruling the Moon, Pluto, and Saturn in the third house of writing, teaching, and communication, lots of money can be derived from teaching, writing, and communication. Because Saturn and Pluto here, it's going to be a rough road in terms of those progressing slowly. Because Saturn progresses, again, first Saturn return, second Saturn return, as well around 58. And then Pluto starts to come forward around 50. So over the life, you'll find that if you start writing gradually, and if you start pumping out maybe like 500 words a day, or maybe a paragraph here, a paragraph there, you'll eventually have a lot of really good teaching and writing material that you can then use to fuel your life mission of getting all of those fourth house experiences up into the 10th, creating that business environment and that success where everybody can really start to, almost a good word would be, kind of suckle from the life experiences, because family is involved, and really make sure that they don't repeat the same issues that you've had to already work through and master. But a lot of your chart is really speaking towards taking what is hidden, exposing it in a business oriented way, and understanding that, again, just as a final note, like the idea of family being really important, but teaching, writing, communication being connected to finance is a big thing for you, Brian. Excellent. So those are the things. Thank you. I appreciate it. Everybody, let's go ahead and wrap it up for today. Again, if you would like to send in your personal chart information, feel free to private message me. I need your birth date, your birthplace, your exact birth time, and spell out the month and day for those of you overseas, so I know what month and day you're talking about as opposed to flipping it. And check out, I'll put this up on the YouTube channel, the Scorpio Rising YouTube channel, if you'd like the replay. Follow me on Instagram at Scorpio Rising Astrology. And if you'd like to book a private consult or check out some of my classes on the planets, the houses, the signs, all of the Astro-Babble that I basically talked about for the past hour, just go to ScorpioRisingAstrology.com and we will get you hooked up with the deets. Thanks, everybody, and may the stars be ever in your favor.